So first of all, welcome. Welcome everyone. This is Fight Master Todd Campbell, a very dear friend of mine, and I'm going to let Todd do his quick bio, his elevator bio between floor 5 and 6. So go for it, Todd. What do people need to know about you?
Well, I live in Toronto. I teach out of Rapier. And I've spent sort of the last 25 years-ish of my career as a fight director really exploring how to bring historical martial arts to the work that we do. Traditional stage combat really traces its roots back to early 20th century fencing, mostly saber fencing. And what actors would do is they would learn this generic style and then just apply that style to any weapon. So if you're fighting with a long sword, it became the single sword with two hands. Or if you're fighting with a rapier, it would be a rapier and dagger, it would be a single sword with a dagger. So everything came back to this sort of generic single sword style, and which, it is very useful. I don't want to say that we should ignore it entirely, but it kind of ignores the fact that many of these weapons have very sophisticated and complex manners in which they're used, and they're very different. And at Fight Directors Canada, we have a system that allows us to build upon disciplines in earlier sections. So with other societies around the world, you get your certificates piecemeal. So I'll go and I'll get my rapier and dagger certificate, and then I'll get my broadsword certificate, and then I'll get my quarterstaff certificate. And with us, we have a leveling system. So we do 3 in our basic level, and then 4 in our intermediate, and 5 in our advanced. And each one of them allows us to build upon the techniques of the other, but also allows us to really explore those styles. Because I know when I go into my rapier and dagger class that everyone in the class has trained in single sword.
Right.
So they understand that style. So now I can break that style, and I can take the things that are useful to creating something that's more authentic to rapier and dagger as it was practiced, as opposed to this sort of generic theatrical style.
Fantastic, which of course leads me to the first conversational point that I think is worth sharing. So I've been really, really blessed being able to see a lot of your work because we work together so often. And one of the things I find very, very interesting, because we work very differently, and this is important, I think, for everyone to know, that just because someone's different than you doesn't mean you can't cherish them and you can't respect and admire their art, because we as artists all have our own way to get where we need to go. And it's silly to try to homogenize art, right? And so one of the things I think is really neat is I've seen you take a scene in a fight and resurrect it in different groups, which I find very interesting, because of course the individuals in the group make the fight different, despite the fact that you're using broad strokes of the same technique, right? And I guess, can you speak to that about what your goals are about returning to a fight and re-exploring it with different groups?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain fights that I've created over the years. My case of rapier fight is infamous because I've been using the same fight for quite some time. And the reason why I keep going back to that particular fight is because I think that the way that I crafted it allows us to explore everything that particular discipline has to offer. And it's not exactly the same fight that I created 10 years ago. Yeah. I keep changing and augmenting it so it becomes better and better, right? For what I'm trying to get the students to do. So I feel like it's something that is going to allow the student to explore all the aspects of that system that I want them to explore. Also, with that fight in particular, a lot of students have a very positive reaction to it as audience members. And so when I come to teach that system, there's a lot of hope that I will do that fight again.
And I'd like to add,
different than what I would do as a fight director, of course.
Oh no, of course.
Yeah. I never would resurrect my fights unless I'm working like a remount with the exact same actors.
Absolutely. And all I was going to say is that it's a bit of a. I think I was not being entirely fair when I said that you're doing the same thing. You're not. I think you're using the roots of something that's important to you, and that you, as you so aptly said, speaks to the need of the technique and the level, but you're using it really to allow you to drill down and get back to it.
And
bring it
just
up.
to go back on that point, there's really only 2 fights I've done that with in my teaching career. I have a Greek sword and spear and shield fight that I keep going back to because I really like how it explores those dynamics, and the case fight again. Most of the time, though, I might resurrect phrases or parts that I think really help to exemplify the style and the thing that I'm trying to get the students to go for. But often I'm recreating. I'm not recreating. I'm reimagining how I want to explore the level each time. I do, however, want to state that I do steal choreography constantly, mostly from the historical masters. So I'll go back to Capoferro and I'll look at one of the plays from his manuscript from 1610, and I'll say, okay, well, I really like this thing, and I want to explore this with my students. So then I'll take this play, which is usually about 3 moves and someone gets stabbed in the eye.
And if I may, sorry, just in case people haven't had any experience with historical works or terms, when you say play, we're not talking about a theatrical written script.
No,
right? Just as for people who haven't had this experience yet. So just quickly, if you don't mind, you mean play by...
Sure. In the manuscripts, you'll often find a play, which is a series of movements that are described by the author to show you how the system works. Right. So it's usually like someone comes in, they do this action, which is followed by this counteraction, which is followed by this counteraction, in which someone gets stabbed in the face, is usually how it goes. So what I'll do is I'll look at that and say, okay, well, I really like how this starts. I can't do a stab in the face, of course, but how could I stretch that out into something that is more like a theatrical fight? So most plays that you see in manuscripts are only a couple of moves, 2, 3 max, sometimes a little more than that, but very, very rarely. So what I'll do is I'll take that as my basis and then just string it along so we get something that's, like 5 to 10 moves, which is something that's more visually dynamic for the audience to watch than 2 or 3 moves and people back out of distance again.
Right. No, brilliant. And since we're talking this way about it, one of the things, and I'm going to embarrass you, one of the things I really, really cherish about you and my friendship with you is the interesting duality of what you are as an artist. And the first is, I think you have an immensely mature, healthy sense of self-worth and importance when you look at your art. So what I mean by that really is that you care about things passionately. You approach them with a real sense of how important they are to you. And yet, the other side of this duality is that you've allowed such space for others to approach you with their own style of art. And so you and I have so many friends who, despite the fact they might actually be doing some historical work along the similar lines as you, will maybe end up with very different outcomes and very different approaches. Other people who've decided to approach the work in industry standard, which is a term I think you use well, explaining that it's what people know and are used to in the industry. And I guess one of the things I want to have you speak about is how do you manage that? How are you able to both enjoy stuff that you wouldn't do in the way you would do it, and still feel able to have voice for yourself, that you're not sort of a weather vane allowing anything to determine what you think is good or not?
Right. Well, I think a lot of that comes back to the structure of Fight Directors Canada. We're still, even today, we're still a boutique fight organization. Like, we're not as large as the Americans or the Brits. And that's given us a freedom to explore the art in ways that are a little different, right? Like, I don't think there's anyone within our organization who sort of mandates that this is how you have to do something. And this brings up a really interesting point. When I was, the year I was made a Fight Master in 2012, there was a discussion that was going on at that time, before I was a Fight Master, about including in our basic glossary. So we have at Fight Directors Canada a written glossary. We're one of the few organizations that do this, have a written glossary with a written examination.
At each level. Todd? You there? Todd, you froze?
Pardon me?
I just said at each level. Sorry, you froze for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So you were saying, so you have a written glossary, yeah, and a
Yes,
written test.
and there was talk at that time of including within our written glossary some of the Italian rapier terms and some of the German longsword terms. And I teach Italian rapier. That's the basis of the rapier that I teach. And the basis of my longsword is German. So you would think I'd be totally for all of that. And I was vehemently against it. And the reason was that as soon as we put it into our glossary, it would become mandated that everyone would have to teach that because it could be something that would be on a written test. And I thought this was a terrible idea because it then forced people into a particular style. And what if you're someone who wants to explore German rapier or Italian longsword or just good old-fashioned stage combat hack and slash broadsword, right? Like we shouldn't be. I was very clear that I think that even though I have a very strong sense of the style that I like, I never ever want to dictate to another instructor how they teach, what style they use. I think at our basic sword and our basic arms, we need to be a little more standardized because that's sort of the basis for everything. But apart from that, it should be style agnostic. You can do whatever you want.
Sure.
And that forces us as an organization to focus more on principles instead of techniques.
Right.
So what are the principles of stage combat that apply to this weapon system? And what I hope that does for our students is allows them to have a freedom to be able to take those principles and then apply to any sort of martial system that they're interested in, which is where we get things like Richard Cuomo looking into some of the indigenous martial arts, which is fantastic, and some people who are looking at other styles outside of what we normally think of as traditional stage combat.
Right. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when you said should be more, you didn't say homogeneous, but basic should be more similar. I don't think you're saying that we're failing in that. I think you're saying that that's just the level you feel we're being successful in giving a foundation that can be shared across the country pretty evenly, allowing more creativity at the intermediate and advanced levels.
Yeah, because the argument against what I've just laid out is that, well, then how do we, when we're giving out a certificate, what does that actually mean? What sort of education level does that mean for the student? And I think because we are a little bit more rigid when it comes to single sword and unarmed, that's where we get our homogeneous level of education. And then after that, we can explore. Yeah.
No, that's great. And I think one of the things I really like is there's been a lot of travel within the organization. So I think people are in fact working with people, if not, let's call them first generation, meaning people working directly with you, they're working with people who've worked with you. So there's a lot of shared, there's a lot of community knowledge that I think is working very well that way. And speaking as someone who, I'll fully admit, because of how my brain works and how I find voice to the art we're trying to create, there are mosquitoes that create. I do embrace some of the Italian aspects of rapier and some of the Italian and German aspects of longsword. I know compared to others, I do very little because I'm with you 100% about teaching. I like to think of it as the philosophy or the why behind what we do. And so for me, I might get hung up on terms. And so therefore, I'm approaching a different way. I think what I should tell people who don't know us is that we frequently work together with yet another teacher. So they get, I hope, the best of all worlds, so that I always have a great confidence that they're getting a lot of terms and marriage of historical acts with you when we're teaching together. And I feel a tremendous sense of freedom to then work in the way that I feel is important. And so I guess this is an advertisement for people who are looking for ways to spice up how they teach. Work with others. Definitely have a team behind you rather than being the sole instructor. One, because it's a lot on your shoulders, and two, you learn a tremendous amount from your peers. And I have to say that working with you, Louisa, Eric, Chris Mott, there's just a lot of people that I've taken ideas away with because of being experienced. So that brings me to what I want to ask you. Is there something you know that other people do that you don't do that you just like, fuck, that's amazing? right? Like, because there's so many things I could mention that I love about you or about Simon, you know what I mean? But I'm just curious, or Casey, I'm curious, is there something you just go, this, whenever you're about to sit down and watch a fight from whoever, you're like, this is gonna be amazing because I know they're gonna do X or Y. So I'm just curious, what turns your crank that's different from your own art?
One of the things that you do very well, I just can't, is choreograph on the spot. You're very much someone who you go into the room, you see everyone around you, and then you build in that moment with your assistants or with the other students. And that's something I've never been able to do. I never feel really comfortable with it. I think because I tend to be a little more rigid in my style, I don't particularly like building with my assistants simply because they sometimes don't
do it. Yeah.
Yeah, they sometimes don't follow the rules that are within the style, so they'll do things that are unorthodox for the sake of unorthodox.
I just punish them for that. I just punish their character for that.
It's true. But I also, for me personally, I always look back at stuff that I've created in the moment and like, I just don't like that. Yeah. And then I either live with it or try to fix it, and that's always a bad idea. So I always go and create my stuff. I would say about 60 to 80% of it I do in here.
Right,
and then,
before,
and then work it out with my assistant just before I'm about to teach the phrase or the choreography or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's something. There's another thing that, again, you do very well, Simon does very well, our found objects discipline at the advanced level, which is really an advanced scene study class with fighting.
100%, yeah.
Totally, that's exactly what it is. And it's something that I've never really been comfortable with, again, because I think probably because I like system and form within my fighting, and that one is completely formless, right? You just have to build it on the day. So that's something that I always, whenever I see either you or Simon build one of those, I'm always in awe of it.
Well, thank you. I will be the first to admit there are times where it doesn't work, and I have, if anything, I have learned to have to be able to say, one, I was wrong when I'm building it, or more importantly and more valuably, rather than I was wrong, discovering a better action or choice, choosing that better action and explaining why I'm making the change. Because I think, if I may, one of the things I like is the humanity we bring, right, when we're teaching. And I think it's important, despite the fact that we have both the respect and the burden of being fight masters. I think I want to express how much respect I have for you and fight masters Simon and Casey, because they fully admit they're still learning, right? And I think, going back to something you said earlier, I would suggest one of the reasons why you feel comfortable bringing back a fight and feel like it's not cheating is because you're always using a fresh eye and a later time in your life, and you are interested in, dare I say, perfecting it, which we both know is impossible, right? But this goal to give it another life and to find new things about it, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I guess the question I want to ask now is, what's new for you in exploration? Is there something new that you're looking at that you want to share? Mosquito.
You know, I really wish I could say I've been spending these last 2 months of quarantine doing a lot of research and that, but really haven't. I have been googling around a bit with some of the Meyer text, mostly just reading a lot of videos on YouTube and seeing, oh, that's really interesting and theatrical. What's great about the Meyer text, and I'm talking about a fencing master named Joachim Meyer. His manuscript was published in, I believe it was 1570, and he's a Germanic fight master who traveled all around and picked up a lot of stuff and then came back to his hometown and wrote this manuscript that is comprehensive. It goes through every sort of weapon they were using at that time. And what's really interesting about it is he takes some of the rapier and dagger stuff that he was seeing in Italy, which is more the Balinese side sword. So instead of it being a thrusting weapon that you can cut with, it's a true cut and thrust weapon.
Right.
And he
it's pretty early, right?
It is rather early,
yeah.
And then he takes that and he translates it through German martial arts. So he takes all of the ideas of it and then funnels it through the Lichtenauer school of martial arts. So using all the terms, Ochs and Flug and all the different ways that you would cut and stuff. So it's a very interesting take. But what's great about his longsword work is that by that point in history, the longsword was not something that you would carry around a lot and fight with. It was more of a prize fighting weapon. So it was a weapon that fencing masters would go and they would, you'd have these prize fights where different martial arts schools would get together and they would erect a little stage in the center of town and they would all play for the prize. So they'd have all their students run in and fight each other. And the longsword was like the heavyweight match. And there's a lot of great stuff within Meyer that's so theatrical because he's playing to the crowd. So there's a lot of really interesting manipulation of the blade. There's also, because the rules of the match was that to win the match, you had to draw blood, but you couldn't kill anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of very interesting, strange cuts where a thrust would be more efficient, but the cut keeps you out of, being charged with murder.
Right, and breaking the rules of the game.
Exactly. So I'm looking at that sort of stuff right now, but that's about it.
Mm-hmm. And again, because I know you, some of the things you've explored that I thought was super interesting was the approach of bringing alive the buckler and single sword, the approach of exploring what happens when two different rapier schools meet.
Mm-hmm.